All right,
All right.
we're back with another episode of Skull Session Salute, where we pay tribute and celebrate the life of the late great Bob Nalbandian. And I'm pleased to have with me today a staple behind the scene, the LA scene there in the '80s, during the heyday of that classic LA metal scene there in the '80s. Mr. William Howe, better known to many as DJ Will. Will, how are you, man? Thanks for coming on with me.
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me for this. This is great.
Yeah, no, appreciate you coming on, Will. So, Will, speaking of Bob, I know you guys, of course, you go way back to those, like I was saying, those glorious days of the early '80s in the LA metal scene, and you obviously, I know, you were an A&R guy for a while there for Metal Blade Records during that time as well, and of course, at that time, Bob had his infamous fanzine, the Headbanger, coming out of Orange County. So obviously, you've known Bob now
Mhm.
for better part of 4 decades. And so many that I've spoken to
Yeah.
so far doing this have said that they can't really recall exactly. A lot of people say, I can't really recall exactly the first time I met Bob, but that he was always around. So it was just, he was always around the seat, so it was hard
Yeah.
for them to pinpoint. But for you, I mean, if you don't mind, I mean, just talk about it if
Yeah.
you can remember. I know it's a long time ago, but what was the first time you met Bob when you guys were working together with bands back there in the early '80s in LA?
Well, one place, and thank you again. I really appreciate this because you know, as we're doing this, this is post the celebration of life we had for Bob here in Hollywood. So my
Mhm.
emotions were high then. So this will pick right back up. But one place I can tell you absolutely for certain where I did not meet Bob for the very first time, and very few people can say that, and that would be at the very first Metallica show.
Okay.
Bob was there. Bob was
Mm,
in there recording. So there is that. So no one can say I was there when I was there from the beginning. It's like very few people. There's a small list, a very small list, and only Bob can say he's on that list. But
mhm.
my history with Bob kind of falls in that same spectrum of all the different shows and concerts that I would attend. I would see Bob, but I'm gonna have to say potentially, and it makes sense because it just becomes very cyclical with one band, and that
Mhm.
would be Armored Saint.
Okay.
Armored Saint did a lot of shows like the Troubadour, um, just around and whiskey and whatnot. But I want to say a country club in Reseda, California. But I want to say it was a Troubadour, 92 or 93, and I
Mm.
believe he was at the in store for Blue Meanie Records in Woodland Hills, and that was probably the first time I met him. This was pre um, or the very early stages as he was starting the Headbanger fanzine,
Okay.
because meeting him in person was at one of those places, and then I know that we eventually were tape traders,
Okay.
pen pals and all that. But we
Mhm.
lived in different area codes. But for the most part, I would say Armored Saint 82 or 83. It's
Wow.
fuzzy, but that's what I can pinpoint.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's great. You can pinpoint it because, like I said, a lot of people can't, which is kind of funny, But yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. So, Will, I mean, obviously, guys like yourself, Bob, obviously behind the scenes guys. I mean, you guys were obviously extremely pivotal in terms of making the scene, in my opinion, at least what eventually it became. I mean, in order for any scene to become a movement, which really is what that scene became, I mean, you need to have behind the scene people to get it to a point where there's just a heavy push, whether it's via radio or magazines, periodicals, whatever it may be. And the one really great thing I noticed about you guys who really were there in the early days of that metal scene, working behind the scenes, is that there's really it didn't seem like there was really any competition or anything among any of you. You guys, I mean, all I guess I saw it obviously at the celebration of life with Bob for Bob too. I mean, and just from here talking, to Bob for so long and him telling stories, I mean, it seems like you guys really all just got along so well. In my experiences working in the music business, especially in LA, which I did for a while, it's a cutthroat business. Everyone knows that. It's your
Yeah.
cliches, adjectives, that people use to describe it. But, I mean, the LA scene really seemed like it was a bit of an anomaly. Like there was just such a unique camaraderie amongst, and just like that community feel amongst everybody. And it seemed like you guys were really just all bonded by the music, and there was really nothing that really ever got in the way of that, which, like I said, is extremely rare. I mean, in your opinion, I mean, why do you think you guys really? Why? What is that? Why is it so different with your guys' scene and community when it came to really having that camaraderie that you just don't really see that often, within the music business?
My experience really, for the most part, was dealing with underground rock and heavy metal bands. Underground
Mhm,
rock and heavy metal bands that weren't getting airplay, weren't getting exposure in the magazines, the big magazines and that.
mhm,
It was all underground, literally meant underground. And we're talking pre-internet, pre all that.
mhm,
When you see the same faces time and time again, that's where you strike up that friendship because we have the same interests,
mhm,
uh, collecting the same releases time and time again. So over a period of moments where this is a continuing cycle, there really is no competition. In the way I'm trying to put it is, we are hungry to see all these bands because it's very exciting, very new, much like all those bands at the time. They're hungry, up and coming, trying to get signed, trying to get their names out there, whatever awareness that they can make. So we built this friendship over so many years. And when I get into the areas of tape trading, and then starting at Metal Blade Records, doing pretty much everything under the sun. Hey, when I'm seeing people from the labels, we're really kind of going for the same thing. But meanwhile, it's like, I'm not, and we're not even discussing budgets. It's about the
mhm,
discussion of music, the discussion of why we're here. Why are we at this dinky, dingy garage, seeing this band play 3 or 4 songs? If
mhm,
that they can impress us, or they can leave an impression, so we can take this tape to our bosses and things of that nature. So again, just with Metal Blade was distributed by Enigma Records. Enigma had their reps at the time, and then Enigma also had different labels like Restless and whatnot. So they signed
mhm,
everything under the sun. Relativity, Combat, that was back east. But in my circle, just in the Los Angeles area, all the big boys, all the big major labels, they really weren't in the picture all that much in terms of what I was going out and trying to sign. Because Metal Blade, we were signing bands that we liked. We weren't looking
mhm,
for, songwriters and hit songs and things of that nature, where the all the big labels at that time, their focus on, I mean, yeah, they had rock and metal acts on their label, but it was a gradual thing. That whole explosion from like 83 on, they were
mhm.
then signing everything under the sun, obviously starting with the very early stages, Quiet Riot, Rat getting signed, on and on and on. So that became a thing. But meanwhile, pre that, we're basically just surrounding ourselves with these underground great bands that we enjoyed, rather than trying to sign them for you know big long-term record deals, because we didn't have
Mhm.
the funds for big long or an independent label.
Mhm.
And God bless Brian Slagle for starting the label and getting it up and running, with obviously the Metal Master compilations and all the bands. And everyone knows, if you know your metal history, or at least with Metal Blade Records, how important they were to so many bands trying to make it in Los Angeles. But again, all the different familiar faces, the folks, the radio, the marketing, the retail folks. Hey, it's like, you know, there's no, we're sharing information. It's not like, oh, I found these 5 or 6 groups, and I'm not going to tell you about it.
Hmm.
It just really wasn't that. It was not, as you mentioned, cutthroat is kind of it really became in the latter years, but in that era, early '80s, just in the mid early '80s, you know 87, 88. It's tough. It's tough to sort of narrow that down, but you just saw this progression change when the majors came calling. Then the paradigm shifted a bit, but early
Mm.
on there just wasn't. My experience, there was none of that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Then that's the reason why. And like I said, it is so unique, and it's just you guys are definitely blessed to have experienced something a lot of us wish we could have in LA at that time. There's no doubt about it. So Will, I was talking the other day to Bernie K from Sound Barrier, doing the same thing here, and he was mentioning to me that obviously for him and for the band,
Mm-hmm.
it was obviously very difficult back in the early '80s for them to get any attention in the early goings, obviously because of how they looked, being an all black, all black band. But he mentioned how Bob really was one of those exceptions where, he was obviously always at their shows. He was championing them, pushing them in the headbanger when most simply just really had no interest initially supporting a band like them.
Yeah.
From being around Bob and knowing him, obviously, during those early days, I mean, how critical were guys like Bob and Brian Slagle, who obviously later signed on the Metal Blade, how critical, really, and significant were they when it came to promoting and pushing for a more really inclusive and diverse scene during those days, which, obviously in early goes, it just wasn't.
But Bob was crucial. Um, he just was. He had the ability to network. He had the ability to, if I said talk about music, but really get into the nuts and bolts of why this song is important, why this band will do something. He did a lot of forecasting because being early on, uh, supporters of underground music and all the artists that have come from that, he had the voice, and that was something that um, a lot of people did not take the time to do. I mean, this is a lot of legwork, a lot of burning calories to get to shows. Whether you
Sure.
drive, you're taking the bus, or you're getting dropped, all that.
Mm.
It's a lot of work because you're going to the show, you're there for hours on end. You talk to the band, you're hanging out after the show, you're exchanging numbers, you're exchanging all this information, and then you know all that knowledge Bob accumulated. Of course, it resulted in him doing the Headbanger fanzine. He also
Mm.
championed a band called Eden. He
Mhm.
went, to give you a basketball analogy, he really did a full court press and getting them signed. For
Mhm.
those that may not know, Eden were a band put out a release in 1986, and they came out of the ashes of a band called August Red Moon, based in Orange County, who he also championed very well. So he again just really wanted to highlight bands that weren't going to get the time of day from the circus and the hit paraders at the time. Everything was
Mhm.
relegated. Really, seriously, uh, it's easy for anyone to just click on YouTube and just sort of see what the new single or the new band is out there. But we really had to struggle to find this information. That's why the pen pals, the fanzines, that's what kept things going. And Bob was at the seriously, he was at the forefront of that, and it really helps immensely to so many bands, especially for the exposure, because what they would do is take whatever write up of the demo or the EP or the LP that they've pressed themselves. Bob would write about it, put it in his fanzine, and they would take that review and put it in their press kit. Or, hey, we
Mhm.
got this, got 9 stars and Headbanger fanzine. It was a big deal. If you see that in Metal Forces, there was Kick Ass Monthly back east, on and on and on. There was fanzines all over the world, but for Los Angeles area with Headbanger, just having a review was a big deal. And even when Brian Slagle, who did it earlier with a heavy
Mhm.
metal review, that was also something that Brian was passionate about with doing his fanzine, and he eventually, his trajectory, of course, went into the compilations and then doing a label. But Bob was nonstop. Even when the Headbanger stopped after I think a dozen or so plus issues, he kept
Hmm.
going. It was continuous. All the legacy bands, he still would talk about their new releases or the new tour because he had a voice, and he had a passionate voice where he could meticulously talk about the songs, lyrics, the artwork. I remember getting into long dissertations about what it meant to have a strong album cover. Because if you didn't know anything about the music, if they had like metal studs or a flying V or a Marshall stacked on the album cover, we're just picking up just based on that.
Hmm.
There's a band called Trance from Europe. That one comes to mind. That was there was a hand coming out, coffin, and then see or plug. I'm trying to remember the cover design, but this is off the top of my head. But that was a conversation that we had about. I knew about them from a fanzine. It's like he goes, yeah, I didn't get a chance to write about them, but this, Metal Hammer did something on them. Yeah, I only picked up that album because of the album cover, and it turns out it was pretty damn heavy, or
Hmm.
it's just little anecdotal things like that. That was his specialty, is giving you the reason why you should listen to these bands. So you don't get that much. Yeah, you can, publicists can send out a press release and give you long paragraphs about an upcoming release and give you all these bullet points about what to listen for. It's not the same thing.
Hmm.
Bob was, you know, he was rare person in terms of what he could do by just his words. So
Wow. Yeah.
that's a lost art.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, he's yeah, very just a unique person, like I said, all around like
Yeah.
that. And that's what a lot of people obviously been everyone share. That's one thing everybody obviously agrees on is just how unique he was in that regard. Absolutely. So I mean, Will, we were talking a little bit before we started here that, obviously you've worked with Bob a lot, you've been in his movies. You've, like you said, appeared on T
Yeah.
Radio V, episode
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
almost 10 years
Yeah.
ago, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
to promote the Inside Middle series. Bob obviously he's always had, great respect for you and knew your importance, of course, to the scene just as much as his was. If you don't mind, if there's just sharing, well, I mean, I guess if there's anything that comes to mind, one maybe particular moment or story that stands out when you think of Bob and your history with him, what would that be?
That's 40 years of
I know.
knowledge in this old noggin, and oh
Yeah.
boy. Hmm.
Or just one
Well,
particular moment that you can remember that just comes to mind.
well, I'll share this with you. Um, it was, well, both. I'll I'll give you two sad occasions and one joyous occasion.
Okay.
And um, we had shared conversations at obviously at all three. Um, the two occasions, one of which was the passing of David Pritchard from Armored
Okay.
Saint.
So, mhm.
Uh, Bob was at his services. Was in Pasadena. Bob also attended services to Gina Zamparelli, who was another amazing promoter of music, as well as um, booking bands. She was a known booker, and her background was being one of the very few female um, people do that here in Los Angeles. But what she did, it was Perkins Palace. Perkins
Okay.
Palace was a venue that was really strong in its heyday. And once it went away, Bob was, you know, instrumental in trying to get this venue to sort of like landmark status, so they didn't mow it down for condos. This was,
Mm-hmm.
and Bob was along the way to, try to help Gene along. While that didn't pan out, it was just one of those situations where Bob cared. Um, with David Pritchard, of course, we were huge Armored Saint fans. Bob was there very much in the early days, and we obviously shared that connection. Um, Attending um, David's services, but at that time, we it was, it was discussions about, discussions about the old days and the shows and things of that nature. And um, I think what we had discussed was a particular show with Armored Saint uh, that we had attended. Big show. This is when they wore the armor, the whole thing, and it came out. And
Mm-hmm.
John Bush dressed up in armor, and a big sword fight, the whole thing. And this is when they were literally wearing armor. That was, the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. And then when we were at Gina's services, we had discussed that, and then we had discussed that particular show where I remember how long it took me to get to, I wasn't driving at the time, how long it took me to get to Perkins for this show. And I forgot, I think he was still in Orange County at the time. And I go, I don't know how you got around. I don't know if you had a driver's license. And this was sort of afterwards, after, the services had happened. And we were reminiscing about the show. And then as we just sort of just snapped back into focus about how much energy it was to be up front and just to enjoy that show. Um, and then we were just turning positive situation, turning the situation more positive about what Gina did, the venue that it was held at, and the band that performed, all circumvented about with Bob. And we were able to just remember the good times
Mm-hmm.
at a very sad occasion. And I was happy that people were able to say some great things at Celebration Life for Bob. And it's just a little ironic that when we had that event, John Bush is the first singer, excuse me, the
Mm-hmm.
first speaker. And I don't want to, it's a little full circle, just a bit.
Okay.
Whereas that band has been synonymous with Bob, and that those are things I'll miss. Um, and just remembering just little things. Those are things I'll miss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other, the more happier moment with Bob was just being a part of the last things that he was working on last several years was, the Inside Metal, all the many different documentaries that he has put together. Just asking me to take part of it, just to sort of give my, you know, you know, my history, my background, anecdotal things.
Mm-hmm.
Asking me to take part of it was a big deal to me, and the scheduling and all the back and forth. For him to ask me to do that, because you want to get the bands, because that they really made the scene, but there was the people behind the scenes that also were just as important. And I think in the discussions that we had off camera, I'll just summarize this: we had many things in common. His passion was my passion, and for me to be part of his some of his final work, that meant everything to me, because I with rock and heavy metal, that's the one area that I will always be passionate about. And he wanted me to share that in his docs, and that that I will always be appreciative of.
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Well, thanks for appreciate you sharing that with that us, Will. And yeah, and Bob, he's that's one thing about him is he's always looked out for for really anybody that he saw that had something to share, or he just saw something in. And whether you were a big, it was a musician or just someone, he was a friend of his or whatever. Yeah, he was always, that's the one thing he's always including everybody into everything. He loved
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
people connect and watch people create relationships with each other is something he always, I know had a passion for too, which was great. And yeah, so I appreciate you sharing
yeah.
that with us, Will. Yes, I got
Yeah. He,
you. Yeah,
no, I was gonna say
yeah.
he was the metal conduit. I'll call him that.
Middle
The
conduit.
Matter was the metal conduit, and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I agree. Yeah. So just we're just getting ready to wrap this up. Well, like I said, once again, appreciate you coming on and sharing some words. I mean, is there any last words here that you have that wanted to say about Bob or to Bob, or just before we wrap it up here?
well, I'm sure that everyone's given um, their thoughts about what he's meant to them personally, and what he's done um, for the music scene. I would hope that anyone seeing this, or seeing any of the documentaries for the very first time, enjoy what's said in the footage. Know that the bands are talking about an era that will never ever happen again in our lifetime, but meanwhile we have it forever.
Hmm.
And with the blood, sweat, and tears that Bob put into it, and all the everyone that he's worked with, Joe Floyd, Toby Bad, Carl Alvarez, on and on and on, everyone that has helped Bob get those up and running, just know that he was one of a kind, and he meant what he said when he told you about music. You will have the opportunity, if you've never met Bob before, you'll have the opportunity to hear his voice, see his likeness, and with the documentaries and all the podcasts, uh, and all the footage that exists, I hope it will be archived. I hope it will be accessible for anyone wanting to know more about who Bob Nalbandian was, because this is an area in which, if you particularly are picking up, your a rock and metal album for the very first time, just know that someone, not only many people were before you, but there were very few rare people that can give you such a dissertation, and really the history of what you're listening, um, that is just will never be matched. I mean, if you think of the term idiot savant, that was Bob.
Hmm.
And he was like this, he was like a storyteller, and that's like, again, long, just conversations about, again, lyrics, album covers, tours, solos.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it's it's and then having these conversations in person, not on text, not an email, in person. That was the big deal about Bob and about that era. So again, if you're discovering the documentaries produced and directed by Bob Nalbandian, please appreciate what you're seeing and what you're hearing, because a lot went into it, because he was someone that was all about it. And again, I'll miss my friend. I'll miss my friend of held it together till the end. um, I will miss my friend 40 years. And I want to again thank everyone who has who was always had something good to say about Bob, because I don't know of any bad. I don't. Thank you for doing this, and appreciate it.
Yeah.